Hello, everyone. Welcome to LIFEedge, where life doesn't have to be mediocre. I'm joined today by our co-host and friend, Dr. Susan Nash. Hey, Susan, how are you?
I'm great. I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. And we have a couple of guests, but before that, let's do the intro. Here we go. So, Susan, would you like to do the honors today?
I'm thrilled to be able to introduce my good friends, Dr. Valerie Fox and also Dr. Lynn Levin. And they are here today to talk about poetry and collaboration and creative writing.
And hello, both of you.
Hi, Rick. Hi, Susan.
Hello, Rick. Hello, Susan. Great to be here.
Oh, we're glad you could make it. And this is interesting. I find the topic interesting, the collaboration between creative writing and poetry and how all of that comes together. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I know Susan's got a whole mess of questions. Of course, she knows you guys, so that makes it easy. I'm along for the ride. I want to learn. So, Susan, would you like to start?
Oh, definitely. So both Valerie and Lynn have written for a long time, and I thought it'd be interesting to hear the story behind how each one of you started to write, and basically why you write and how writing is different when you collaborate.
Shall I start?
Definitely.
Yeah, you go first, Valerie.
I guess like many people, I probably started writing out of a kind of psychological sort of imperative. But then as I get older, and as most of us get older, it becomes a kind of habit. It becomes a way to communicate with people and express yourself. I think my interest in collaboration simply comes from a lifelong interest in collaborative art. And I guess I've just more, over the last few years, I've started to get a little more confident about my own ability to kind of participate in collaborative work, including interdisciplinary kind of work. And then I just think collaboration is fun. Lynn and I are colleagues. We've been at Drexel for approximately the same number of years. And so, you know how sometimes you just get to know somebody and you think, oh, it would be fun to collaborate with them because we're just very simpatico in terms of not just our teaching, but some of the poetry we enjoy reading.
And Lynn, I was interested in how you got started and the types of poetry you wrote at the very beginning.
Well, I got started in poetry when we were learning how to read in elementary school, and the teachers would teach reading and phonics via rhyme. And I loved making lots and lots of lists of rhymes, and I was terrible in math and terrible in gym, but writing was something that I could always do. So, and then as the years went on, I mean, like Valerie, I started to write for my own psychological reasons, working through things that were sometimes happy, sometimes not so happy, and I love describing things, and so that's how that evolved.
Well, you know, I got to know Valerie a long time ago. It was before we were both I think we were both in the PhD programs, and we were both really interested in experimental poetry and language poetry, and essentially something that was really subversive at the time. Not subversive in a way that you would think was political, except in a sort of meta-political way. And I just wanted to ask you, Valerie, what is it now about poetry versus the early years that you might see as the same or different, and especially in terms of innovation and experimentation?
I think I'm still very interested in the innovative styles, very much indeed. I never really stopped being interested in that, although I think it became so popular and institutional. It became very popular within the institutions that it felt like it wasn't so subversive anymore. But I somehow always felt like the impulse for me came from inside as much as outside. I came from a kind of a fairly conservative background, and so it was rebellious. It felt rebellious to me to be experimental or avant-garde, so to speak. So I always thought the writers that resonated with me tended to be experimental. And it's not that I disliked less experimental writers. I like some of them for sure. I'm sure Lynn and I both like, John Berryman, for example. But I just always liked the more experimental types. And I have I guess my role models were those sort of new American poets types. I studied with John Taggart at Shippensburg University, and he used to bring in amazing writers like Robert Creeley and Jerome Rothenberg and Robert Duncan. So this was just the tradition that at a very young age I became familiar with, and it really resonated with me. So I guess I still admire that tradition, and even though I guess I also I see as a positive value how there are so many kinds of poetry now. When we talk about traditional forms or spoken word poets, etc. I think I think we need to include everybody. But my impulse is still to write in an experimental way, not, I guess, akin to the language poets when it comes right down to it, as you know.
Well, that's interesting, and I guess in the case of Lynn, what I see is really intriguing about your writing is it's innovative and subversive with respect to many things, especially consumer culture and sort of materialism. And I was wondering what some of your thoughts are about that.
Well, I do put a lot of popular culture, cultural references in my work. And I have to say, one of the wonderful things about collaborating with Valerie is that we approach poetry very differently. I like a more mainstream poetic approach. People I would emulate poetically would be, or esteem poetically, not that I emulate them, Pablo Neruda, B.H. Fairchild, Alicia Stallings, A.E. Stallings, Tony Hoagland, people like that, and Mark Doty, and many, many others. But I like poems that I can kind of follow logically, as with a sentence, and too many leaping associations kind of confuse me. So I like poems that I can get up in front of a crowd and read them almost like stand-up poetry or stand-up comedy in ways.
Oh, that's really interesting. And I mean, that's a really intriguing sort of diametrically opposed approach to what Valerie has done. And so that I'm very curious to see how they work when you collaborate.
Well, they work really great because Valerie has a lot of insights about things like chance operations and ways of using found objects and random references to put into a poem to help a poet go places he or she wouldn't ordinarily go. And then I'm a little more attracted to certain formalist considerations that help people shape a poem and help people throw in a lot of popular culture items or very clear life traumas into a poem.
Oh, that's cool. And the book that you worked on together, which is Prompts for Writing, I really like them because to me the prompts are poems in themselves. And so there's a kind of self-awareness and self-consciousness and self-reflexivity, in addition to the fact that people can actually try out the prompts. And I was, Valerie, what were some of your thoughts about the ways that people use the prompts?
I've been just amazed and delighted that the way they have used them. What Lynn was saying reminded me a little bit of our fake translation prompt. That's an example of one of the more kind of out there ones. It's almost a sort of surrealist or Lupo type of activity. But what we do is we give the participants, we give them copies of poems in different languages. And we urge them to pick one and that's written in a language that they do not know. And then we ask them to create a fake translation based on this. And the interesting thing is what they produce can be just as emotional or personal as if we were asking to do something more traditional. Because what they do is they look in the poem, they find something in the poem to connect with emotionally. So I've had some good responses to that one, and I find that one more challenging. Like one of the reviewers said that this was a prompt for the experts, but I've actually had some feedback from beginners who like that prompt. So that was a real treat to hear that. They also really like Lynn's prompt, which is called the Cameo Cinque prompt. I don't know if you remember that one, Susan. That's where we ask the students sometimes the first day of class to get together and kind of interview each other and write a short poem about each other using syllabics. So I thought that's normally it wouldn't occur to me to give an assignment like that, but because Lynn has had such success, I tried to, and I've had really good success with that one also. It sort of teaches people something about image. They try to like find something really specific to sum up a person's personality. And so I think that it helps them to be very concise and descriptive and use an image in a really great way.
Yeah, I agree. And it is wonderful that prompt works. It's very collaborative because each person is interviewing the other. And I usually tell them, well, ask the person what their hobby is or what their favorite beverage is, and then describe them in terms of their hair color or a piece of jewelry that they're wearing or something like that. So by giving a list of things to ask and interview, do people build enough imagery to pack it into this little 5-line poem?
Well, Lynn, did you ever try the fake translation prompt?
I have to tell you that I have never tried the fake translation.
Even while we were
translate, Susan and I, we have a lot in common because we translate from the Spanish. But these pages of Vietnamese, Chinese, and what else we have, Bengali or something, Valerie, is just daunting to me. But when we hand these photocopies of these foreign language poems out, it's just amazing what people come up with. So that's an assignment, Susan, that I really should take on.
Part of me thinks some people would say, oh, that's just ethically wrong. And I've done fake translations thinking of Zukofsky and Blackburn and things where they deliberately subverted the whole concept of the poem itself. So I tried that, and I made the mistake of doing it on a poem that the poet was still living. They were so mad at me.
How'd they find out?
I sent it to them. They didn't appreciate what it was at all. I said, well, Ezra Pound, think about all this stuff. And they were just like, so I never got to do anything with it. So I think the best thing is do like Ezra Pound did and find stuff that's long dead.
Yes.
Now, I'm curious, in listening to what you're talking about poetry and about language and translations and the way people interpret things, in a society where we're reading less and less, evidenced by how many Barnes and Nobles are closing and how many other places aren't selling books like they used to, how is poetry doing as far as a cultural item? I know in other parts of the world it's probably more popular. I don't know, how popular is it here in the U.S.?
Well, it's not as popular as places in Central Europe where they have these massive poetry festivals with thousands of people gathered in a cave listening to all kinds of international poets. I don't think we have that here. Although we have our wonderful AWP conference with 10,000 writers. But among people who love poetry, they're real devotees. And so there are all these little circles of poets who go to each other's readings and who are avidly writing and madly submitting to magazines. And there really is a proliferation of literary magazines today, in large part thanks to the internet, because not everything has to be physically printed. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of respects, poetry is alive and well, but America has never been a super poetry friendly society. Not like a lot of places in Europe where they have those massive poetry festivals.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I can chime in there too. I think actually I've been in that cave in Villanica.
Yeah, I've been to Villanica.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yes.
And in the cave, and it's near the La Pizza stallions and stuff. But that was an amazing experience and very surreal in the karst area. And I think that Europe has been more subsidized in terms of art and certain types of art than here. So here you get a lot of people who, like you said, they're clusters and groups, but the passion is definitely here.
Yeah, I think if I can chime in, I liked how Lynn said it might be a smaller audience, but it's a very devoted one. I absolutely agree with that. And I also think there's a giant group of youngish and young people who are spoken word poets, and they're very smart and very culturally significant, I think. And so in some segments of society, I think poetry is still valued a lot. But you're right, it is not maybe subsidized and taught. It's probably not taught as well as we wish it would be at the younger ages, and I don't think that the kids are taught even to memorize poems as much as they used to be, although there's a bit of a movement to bring that back because it is such a great way for kids to express themselves. And I think that's actually in terms of the world of people writing about education, that's been very popular. I've been hearing about it lately, this idea of using expressive writing to help people achieve their goals and stay in college and keep their full load and all that stuff. They're actually using that kind of language, the expressive writing. So I think there's a connection there with literary art and reading for sure.
And I think tying back to using poetry to explore one's feelings and also get to know oneself, and especially in a constantly changing world, I think that intensity is not really replicated in other discourses. And both you, Valerie, and Lynn spoke about the usefulness of using poetry to kind of connect to feelings. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Could I speak? I think that's really important today. I think young people, we're surrounded by all this information all the time, and the kids are looking at the screens all the time, and I think sometimes they don't sort of settle down and take the time to reflect. And I think if they read and write poetry, they're going to be doing that. I don't know. What do you think, Lynn?
I completely agree that when young people read, or anyone reads, how poets are talking about their love lives or their childhood or any kind of nostalgic memories that they had, that it's contagious. It allows another person to appreciate that and then say, oh yeah, I can write about that. I had funny or hilarious or bizarre experiences that I want to write about too, and tell people how I felt about it. So a lot of this concentration on the self, on memoir, on one's own experience is feeding into poetry and also the flourishing of creative nonfiction and memoir today. So it all promotes exploration of the self and writing.
I totally agree with that, and I think that it leads to a better understanding of one's own responses to change, and also to essentially what it means to live in the world. I mean, identity and existential sort of angst that seem to attack the thinking, perceiving person, and you can only surf the net so long, but eventually you have to confront your feelings. And I find writing is a perfect outlet for, or not just an outlet, but a way to sort of understand the world. And I was wondering too how you think about fiction, short fictions versus poetry.
Well, I enjoy teaching short fiction also. I don't think of it as that different than poetry, to tell you the truth, because I think of poetry as being kind of, made up stuff. But some people, some students, especially young people, they think of poetry as being autobiographical, and fiction as being things which are made up. So I like to teach them both. And I also think that since they aren't taught to memorize poetry, and they don't have that musicality in their brains, I think writing short fiction is a great way to teach them about voice, and using unusual voices and points of view. And they might be intimidated by poetry. They sometimes think, "Oh, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at that musical poetry part." So they can sometimes feel more confident. I noticed that many of the young, very talented writers, they either think they like poetry or they think like fiction. So I definitely try to get them to try out both. I mean, they may in the end prefer one over the other, for sure. But I like to get them to try to find both. And a lot of my own poetry is kind of written in prose. So I just think that's kind of a 20th century thing, and that seems to be continuing. That there's a lot of going back and forth. The short fiction writers write poetry and the poets write in prose. Don't you find that?
Well, to bounce off of that, I'm not sure that the poetry writers are going into prose, but I'm definitely seeing that students, when I teach a class, it's two genres of creative writing. That's usually fiction and poetry. I see a lot more devotion to fiction than I do to poetry. And people, they have autobiographical elements in the poetry, but they're also wildly inventing, new antagonists and different plots and things. And maybe there's more comfort in the fiction because they are keeping themselves out of it. Whereas for me, and in my classes, poetry opens the door to the self and into one's scary places and psychological places. So I see more uptightness, except for the people who are real poets and who really dive into it. I see more uptightness in poetry, and I see more excitement and zest in the fiction writing.
Oh, that's interesting. And I think for me, what's potentially most exciting is like thinking of Yeats and masks or Japanese I fiction or the idea of autobiography and memoir, but also faking it and doing fake autobiographies. So just the whole idea of exploration of possibilities. How do you get people to overcome their hesitation to take risks?
Well,
Go ahead, Lynn.
Okay. I always tell them that they should go to their scary place and talk about what haunts them. Now, they can go to their scary place and talk about what haunts them by creating another character with, a different name and maybe a different ethnicity, but they still have to talk about what is bedeviling them, because that's the thing that's going to drive the conflict and going to add tension. So I really kind of promote exploration of the self, going to one's scary place. And then sometimes they're afraid to do that. They want to mask the self. So it's okay. I mean, I'm not going to force people to, into self-exposure in uncomfortable places, but when they're talking about the risky areas of their lives and what bothers them and worries them, things get more interesting real fast.
Well, that's cool. And Valerie, how did your experience living in Japan and teaching in Japan, how did that change you or potentially reinforce the thoughts that you had about writing and self-expression?
I haven't thought about it quite in that way. I do think that I often had to teach students who were of mixed levels in terms of their actual ability to understand me, or write in English. So I had to refine my assignments and my communication to them in a way that was really good for me. It really made me try to think about what I was trying to communicate to them. So I think it just made me, in general, just a much better teacher. You know, I think it forced me to, like I said, just prepare very well and to make sure I was reaching every person. Because the students at the school where I was working most of the time, Sophia University, they were just such amazing students, and they knew English really well, but they couldn't necessarily understand a fast lecture or write fast, you know. So it just made me a better teacher because I was teaching to all of them, but I still wanted the assignments and the material to be challenging, you know, because I think we owe it to the students to be challenging. And I guess I was also, I was always asking them questions. I'm very interested in their culture, and I think they just appreciated that, you know, so that helped me to kind of connect to them. So that also might be like the genesis of me as a more personal, feel-good type teacher. I think I used to be more traditional, standoffish kind of teacher. I was afraid of getting too close to the students, you know. But I think I realized in Japan that connecting with them was really a positive thing, and helped me to learn and help them to learn. So I've continued with that, and that's something I admire about Lynn's teaching style too. It's so clear from the beginning, even if it's like a day-long workshop, not even a whole class, you can sort of tell she cares, and so I think that engages the students right away.
Now, Lynn, it's sort of interesting, because before you were talking about getting people into that scary place.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that people don't like silence? They have to be connected 24/7 to noise, whether it's music, whether it's TV. They're never disconnected, because when you're disconnected, you kind of wind up in those scary places. And
Rick, that is a really good point. One's text messages and Facebook and tweeting, and that's all at hand every single second. So, it is a way of looking at other content rather than your own content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a way to just kind of escape from, well, I don't have to face myself when there's so much noise because it's not there. I don't hear it. And I've noticed that's real common, especially, and it's probably started, I'd say, somewhere in the late 70s, 80s, where people just got, the Walkman. Everybody was connected with you went running with a Walkman, you went walking with a Walkman, and you never walked with yourself. You always walked with something else. And to me, poetry is a personal thing. But like you said, if you can't get to the places where you are, what is poetry?
Yeah, that's true, and that's why it's not for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I mean, although I do promote that the mining of one's scary places for themes and content, I can still show them Neruda's elemental odes. He writes about salt or bicycles or tuna in the marketplace, and that is a way of allowing a student to not directly invade the self, but invade description and just keep describing something. Now, eventually, whatever that person's interested in is going to come out in the imagery of whatever they kind of ode they decide to write about. But that's a more comfortable thing for people, because it gives them a thing, a solid object to talk about. So there are ways around, kind of forcing kids to go into their past and their parents and bad breakups with boyfriends and girlfriends and things.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the technology too, this is a kind of connected point. I like to actually address it and talk about it in the classroom a lot. I was just thinking about this, Lynn, lately. A really great, I think, prompt for the classroom might be to you could even start it, like if at the beginning of class people are texting or something, even though you tell them not to do that, and I've talked about why it's not good. Maybe just give them like 3 or 4 minutes to look at some pictures, look at the pictures on their phone or on their laptop or whatever. So as people sort of filter into the classroom and so on, and then just have them say, okay, now forget about that, and now let's write some, short poems or haiku about these images that you've been seeing. And I think that would be a really successful assignment. That's sort of something I do myself sometimes. I just sort of flip through all the pictures on my phone, and I sort of use it as a place to get started. And that it doesn't necessarily start in a scary personal place, but it's something will remind me, of something important to me.
Yeah. Valerie, I think that is a brilliant idea. That way you make technology and the device, the iPhone or the smartphone, the friend as opposed to the enemy.
Yeah, because we sometimes feel that way not in like a library workshop or something like that, but we sometimes in the undergraduate classrooms, we do face that more and more, students who are really addicted to their devices. And I don't want to judge them and make them feel embarrassed, but, I also don't want them to do that, because they need to settle down and enjoy class and enjoy hearing each other's writing,
You guys are way
I like
so
that
nice.
too, and I was thinking too about how we use social media now so much in collaboration with our learning, that it's very useful at least to engage thought and responses to the context and also the content. So I think it's just all about thinking about how to use the devices instead of letting it just sort of run away with us.
Absolutely, yeah. I found that teaching all online classes has been such a helpful thing to me too. And I try to always start with the principle that if there's anything that I can do really well in a regular classroom, I can find a way to do it in the online classroom as well. I shouldn't think, that would never be possible, or that would take too much time, because usually there's some way to adapt it and make it work. I don't know, Lynn just recently taught a 100% online poetry writing class, and I know you had some great ideas about that, Lynn. I was really impressed with how you broke them up into groups, right?
Well, I was going to break them up into groups, but I eventually decided that they would be more interested in seeing what everybody else in the class was doing. I think, I had 20 people in the class or something, and I thought, well, maybe if they're only in their little group of 5, they might be wondering, well, what about those other 15 people in the class? What are they writing about? So I ended up having, rightly or wrongly, having everybody do a thread on everybody's work. It's just that on a given week or a given day, maybe 5 or 6 people were posting their poems. So 20 people weren't commenting on 20 things every single session. But maybe I should do it in groups next time.
But it's always doing something new in an online environment. It's always very time consuming at first, but then it becomes easier the next time around. So maybe the next time around it will be less time consuming.
Yes, I will definitely. You're right. That's the other thing about the online world. Everyone thinks, oh boy, you get to sit at home and what a time saver. But really, it's not, because everything is written. There's no oral discussion. So everything is captured, which is great. All the comments that people write about their poems and their stories are all captured. But there is a tremendous amount of reading. Mm-hmm. And also all the lectures, you could either I didn't do this. I typed out my notes about how I think people should write flash fiction, or a little guideline or primer about flash fiction. But another professor could record a video lecture about that. Mm-hmm. So that's another way to go about that. Maybe I do things the hard way.
At Drexel University, the students they famously take like 6 classes at a time, and so I've never had any success with synchronous undergraduate activities. So that's the same thing happens. You do a lot of writing, and but that just challenges you to be creative. Actually, there's always a way to do what you need to do. One thing I try to remind myself is that when teaching online, they don't have to be online constantly. So a great creative writing assignment might be to give them the directions, and it basically involves going out. Go sit on a train for 2 whole hours and write on the train. so that you can actually justify it by saying, oh, it's an online class, you know, there's time to do that. But I have not had much success with synchronous, even office hours at Drexel. But that's just because they're taking so many credits that they actually seem to prefer writing emails. I have shied away from that sort of ultra personal, like telephone calls with students. I don't know. I think we've talked about this a little bit, Lynn. You sometimes do actually talk to them by phone, but I have not done that yet. I guess there must be different schools of thought on that.
Well, it is getting deep into the trenches, but it was a fully online class, and somebody wanted a phone conference. I mean, I do that, and I actually do phone conferences sometimes when it's a face-to-face class, but my office hours just don't sync up with the other person's free time, so I'll do the phone conference then.
Well,
so creative writing is a very labor-intensive kind of thing. Normally, we have a lot of conferences, like face-to-face conferences, and so we have to try to find ways to replicate that in the online teaching environment.
And we are almost at the end of our time, and before we finish, we'd like to ask you, because this is called LifeEdge, we thought we'd throw the edge in there. What has given both of you the edge in being successful in doing the things you do and teaching the way you do? Valerie?
I just think I'm stubborn, and if something doesn't go well the first time, I make it better the second time, third time. I don't give up, you know. And I also just feel lucky that with teaching, we know sometimes when we're successful. People tell us. And so that has helped me too. So I try to have high standards for myself and high standards for the students, and they tend to respond in a very positive way.
That's good. And Lynn?
My answer is exactly the same as Valerie's. I am relentless. I am persistent, stubborn. If I start a poem and it's not going very well, I just attack it, and I try, and I'll have 20 sheets of revisions and edits and scratch outs, and I think eventually I get where I want to be. So I think persistence, stubbornness, that's me.
Well, we'd like to thank both of you for coming on today. Really appreciate it. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you too, whether directly or if you're giving any talks or at any conferences, you want to let us know what that would be?
Well, I have a website, and there is an events column on my website, so you could, and I would love for someone to show up at any of the readings. And then there is a contact form you could on the website. You could contact me through there. And by the way, it's been a blast to be on LifeEdge. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much, Rick and Susan. It's very fun. I'm easy to get a hold of. I don't expect to leave Drexel University anytime soon, so you can find me through the university, VF25 at Drexel. My website is in place of a website now. We've started a wiki for Texture Press, so you can find out more about me there. And Lynn and I actually both have a blog for our textbook. It's Poems for the Writing, called Poems for the Writing. When you can go there to find tips on writing and tips on where to submit your work. I would love for people to seek us out there too.
Sounds
It's
great.
really so wonderful, and you can always contact me, and I can get information to both of them too. So that I'm just such a fan.
That sounds great. Well, for all
Thank
you
you.
people watching on YouTube, please click the like button if you like it, and subscribe so we know where you are and you'll know when we have new shows. Ladies, a pleasure having both of you on. Susan, as always, we will see you next week. And thanks for watching. This is LifeEdge. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Valerie.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Bye-bye.